He was a widowed farmer, raising a quiet little girl in silence and routine, until one night, a stranger's voice on a forgotten phone whispered, "Dad, come get me." He didn't have a son, but that single plea would unravel a mystery and awaken a kind of love he never thought he'd feel again. If you believe in second chances, in the quiet power of kindness, and in love that finds us when we least expect it, subscribe and stay with us. This story might just stay in your heart forever. The Kansas wind howled low across the prairie, rattling the old window panes of the Bennett family farmhouse. The boards creaked as if they were sighing under the weight of another season. Turning autumn had arrived without ceremony, painting the landscape in quiet shades of amber and rust. Cal Bennett stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching the sun set over fields of fading gold. He wasn't a man given to reflection. Not anymore. Life had trained that out of him. The scar of loss had dulled most of what once sparked inside his coffee had gone cold, but he hadn't noticed. Behind him, the screen door creaked, and the soft patter of footsteps crossed the worn wooden floor. Cal didn't need to turn. He knew that sound, like he knew his own heartbeat. "Maisie," he said, quiet and steady. The little girl stepped beside him, her blonde curls tangled by wind, her tiny frame wrapped in an oversized cardigan. She was 6 now, or maybe 7. He'd stopped counting the months. She still hadn't said the word. Dad. 3 letters that weighed more than all the silence between them. "You hungry?" he asked. She shook her head. Cold, another shake. He reached down, ruffled her hair. She didn't lean in, but she didn't pull away either. That was progress. Cal held on to moments like that, storing them deep like a man hoarding matchsticks in a blizzard. Maisie wasn't his by blood. She'd arrived at the hospital the same night. They told him his wife wouldn't make it through surgery. The child had been abandoned, left with nothing but a thin blanket and a silent scream in her eyes. Cal hadn't planned to take her. He just did. Maybe he couldn't stand to walk away from 2 goodbyes in one night. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. "I made your favorite mashed potatoes and those little sausages you like." She glanced up at him, not quite a smile, but close. Then she turned and disappeared back inside. Cal followed, moments later, closing the door behind him. The farmhouse smelled of warm starch and butter, familiar, comforting, like his mother's kitchen long ago before everything fractured. He set 2 plates on the table. Maisie slid into her chair, wordlessly, fork in hand. She ate slowly, deliberately. Cal wanted to ask her how her day had gone, but conversations with Maisie were like fishing in ice, patient, delicate, and mostly quiet. Halfway through the meal, the silence was broken, not by words, but by the shrill, unexpected buzz of a phone. Cal frowned. He didn't own a smartphone, just a dusty old landline in the corner that rarely rang, but the sound had come from near the front door. He stood, followed it, and spotted a small device lying on the floor by the coat rack. A phone. Not his. He picked it up. Cracked screen. No. Lock battery flashing red. 1 missed call. 1 recent number. Maisie had been outside earlier. Could she have brought it in? He tapped the callback button. The line rang once, twice. And then a soft voice, frantic, whispered, trembling, "Dad, come get me." The words stopped him cold. He didn't speak, didn't breathe. "Daddy," the voice repeated, breaking now, laced with tears. "Please, I don't know where we are. It's dark. Mommy's asleep and won't wake up. I'm scared." "Where are you?" Cal said before he realized he was speaking. The line went dead. He stared at the phone in his hand, the chill in his spine creeping all the way to his jaw. It wasn't Maisie's voice, not even close. A mistake? A prank? No. He knew desperation when he heard it. He had lived it. Cal walked back to the kitchen. Maisie looked up. Her fork was still in her hand, but the food untouched. "I need to check something," he said, grabbing his jacket from the hook. "Stay inside, lock the door. Okay?" She nodded once. He handed her the old landline phone. "If it rings, you answer. If it's me, pick up. If it's not, don't say a word." She took the phone solemn, her fingers small but steady. Outside, the wind had picked up. Cal climbed into his old Ford and started the engine. The sun had dipped below the hills, and shadows were folding over the land like closing hands. He looked down at the mystery phone again, praying it would come back to life. The signal flickered, then lit. He checked the GPS. A pin still hung in the last known location, maybe 2 miles off-road into the western pasture lands. Wherever that little voice had come from, it had been close. He tightened his grip on the wheel. "Hang on, kid," he muttered, shifting into drive. "I'm coming." The gravel crunched beneath Cal's tires as the truck rumbled over the back trail, a route he hadn't taken in years. Trees flanked the narrow road, their skeletal branches clawing at the twilight. A soft mist was settling over the land, like breath on glass, blurring the edges of the world. He glanced again at the cracked phone on the passenger seat. The battery, warning, blinked slower now, like a fading heartbeat. The GPS pin still hovered in the center of an open field, just past the cattle fence, far from any marked roads. No structures, no lights, just prairie. Cal turned off the trail, bumping over uneven terrain. The truck's suspension groaned in protest. He switched on the high beams, scanning ahead for any sign of movement. Every second stretched tight. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe he'd imagined it. But the voice, that voice had been real. He couldn't explain why, but it had carved its way into him like a cold wind through an old crack in the soul. He drove slowly, eyes combing the field. Then he saw it. A rusted-out Chevy Suburban tucked behind a ridge, half hidden by a broken windmill and tall, wind-blown grass. One headlight was shattered. The other blinked weakly like it couldn't decide whether to give up. Cal stopped the truck and killed the engine. Silence fell like a curtain. He approached the vehicle cautiously. The passenger side window was fogged, streaked with little handprints. His stomach turned. He knocked gently. Nothing. He knocked again, louder this time. A small face rose slowly into view. A girl no older than 6 or 7, pale eyes rimmed red. She looked at him through the glass, and Cal felt it again, that sharp, inexplicable tug in his chest, the same tremble he'd heard in her voice. He motioned for her to unlock the door. She hesitated. Then, with a trembling hand, she pressed the switch. The door creaked open. Cal said softly, crouching to her level, "I'm Cal. I got your call." "Are you okay?" She blinked at him. "You're not my daddy," she whispered. "No," he said gently. "I'm not. But I heard you asked for help." The girl's lower lip quivered. "Mommy won't wake up." Cal's heart dropped. He leaned in farther and saw her slumped over in the driver's seat, unmoving, her head resting awkwardly against the steering wheel. A blanket was wrapped loosely around her shoulders. From this angle, it was impossible to tell if she was breathing. "Stay here," he told the girl. "I'm going to check on your mom, okay?" She nodded, gripping a stuffed rabbit like it was the last thing in the world holding her together. Cal moved around to the driver's side, opened the door. The woman stirred faintly at the cold air, groaning. Relief surged through him. "Ma'am," he said. "Can you hear me?" She opened her eyes, slowly, not confused. Her voice was barely audible. Where am I?" "You're okay," he said. "You're off-road, out in the west, pasture lands. My name is Cal. Your daughter called me. By accident, I think." The woman blinked, trying to sit up. "Sophie?" "She's fine," Cal said quickly. "Scared, but safe. The woman tried to speak, but her body sagged again. I'm dizzy. He didn't need a medical degree to recognize dehydration fatigue, and maybe worse. You need help, he said firmly. My place isn't far. I've got a warm bed, food, and a working phone. Let me take you there. She looked at him warily, blinking away the fog. I don't know you. I get it, he said, voice calm but direct. But your car's dead. Your phone's almost gone and it's dropping below 40 tonight. I've got a daughter too. She's your girl's age. I'm not leaving you out here. Her eyes searched his face. Something in his tone, something steady and unshakably sincere, softened her. Sophie, she said again faintly. I've got her, Cal assured her. Come on. 10 minutes later, they were on the road. Sophie sat up front, wrapped in Cal's flannel jacket, holding her bunny close. The woman Ella he'd learned dozed in the back seat, her face pale and drawn. Back at the farmhouse, the porch light cast a warm glow on the worn boards. Maisie opened the door before he could even knock. Her eyes darted between Cal and the newcomers, wide with caution. It's okay, he said gently. They're staying with us tonight. Maisie stepped aside. No words, but she watched the girl, Sophie, with something like recognition, the quiet kind children have when they see another who understands silence. Later, as Ella slept in the spare bedroom and Sophie curled beside her, Cal stood in the kitchen pouring a glass of water. Maisie sat at the table drawing absent-mindedly in a notebook. You okay? He asked. She nodded, then paused. Is she sick? She asked softly, her voice rasping like unused wind chimes. Cal blinked. It had been weeks since she'd spoken more than a single word. She's tired, he said. But she'll be okay. Maisie looked at him, eyes serious. She looks like she's been sad a long time. He nodded. Yeah, I think she has. Maisie put down her pencil. Can she stay? Cal looked at her. The question hung in the air, unexpected, gentle, and impossibly heavy for a 6-year-old to carry. I don't know, he said honestly. But we'll help them for now. Maisie nodded. She went back to drawing and Cal turned toward the window. Outside, the prairie wind whispered across the fields, rustling the tall grass like a lullaby. Ella Monroe awoke to the unfamiliar scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, only that the warmth in the room felt foreign. Foreign but kind. She blinked her eyes open. Faint light filtered through thin curtains casting pale gold across the wooden walls. Her daughter's soft breathing came from beside her. Sophie lay curled beneath a handmade quilt, her little hands tucked under her chin. Her stuffed rabbit nestled tight to her chest. Ella sat up slowly, her head still heavy, her muscles aching from the strain of days, without rest or food. It had been too long since she'd slept like this, in a real bed, in a real room. She ran a hand through her tangled hair, dry and brittle from the weeks they'd spent sleeping in the back of the Suburban, eating canned peaches and gas station crackers. Her gaze moved around the room, a dresser with faded handles, a hand-stitched cross on the wall that read, "Bless this home," a small lamp glowing gently on the nightstand. Nothing luxurious, but everything here whispered of care. Ella exhaled deeply and silently. Then guilt rushed in as it always did, sharp, consuming. She hadn't meant to bring Sophie this far down. She had once stood on concert stages dressed in black velvet, her hands dancing across ivory keys, while hundreds sat in silence, hanging on each note. She had once been married too, though not to love, but to a man who saw her as a trophy. When she tried to leave, he took everything but Sophie. They had driven west, with nowhere in mind. She thought she could figure it out, but Kansas wasn't kind in the cold, and every passing mile wore her thinner. The only thing that had kept her moving was the child beside her, her miracle in a storm. She pressed a kiss to Sophie's temple and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm trying." A soft knock sounded at the door. Ella flinched instinctively, pulling the blanket higher. "It's Cal," a voice called. "Just wanted to check if you're up." Ella hesitated before answering. "Yeah." 1 second. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and glanced at the mirror. Her reflection startled her. Dark circles, hollow cheeks, hair in disarray. Still, she smoothed her blouse, gathered her strength, and opened the door. Cal stood in the hallway holding a steaming mug. He didn't stare. He didn't ask questions. Just offered the mug and said, "Chamomile." It's gentle on the stomach. She took it, fingers brushing his for a moment. Rough skin, steady warmth. "Thank you," she said, almost too softly. "You're welcome," he replied. "Kitchen's through there, if you're feeling up to eating. There's eggs toast, and a lot of applesauce for some reason." His eyes crinkled slightly, the ghost of a smile. Ella nodded, unsure what to say next. "I'll let you get settled," he added, and turned to go, but she found herself stepping forward. "Wait," she said. "Can I ask, why did you come last night? I mean, why didn't you just ignore the call?" He looked at her, steady and quiet. "I don't know," he admitted. Something in her voice. It just didn't let me. He paused, then added, "I've heard that kind of fear before. I guess I didn't want to hear it again and do nothing." Ella swallowed hard. That kind of answer didn't come from a man who rescued people on a whim. It came from someone who had lost. At the breakfast table, Sophie and Maisie sat across from each other. Neither spoke, but Sophie offered a corner of her toast, and Maisie took it without a word. Cal caught the exchange and didn't interrupt. Kids like them didn't need chatter. They needed time. Ella sat gingerly sipping her tea. Her gaze lingered on Cal as he moved through the kitchen. He wasn't polished. His flannel shirt had holes at the elbows. His hands bore old scars. But his presence calmed the room. "You live here alone?" she asked. "With Maisie," he said, pouring coffee. "She came to me 3 years ago," hospital call said. "A little girl had been left with no one claiming her. I was already there for my wife." Ella lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I didn't take Maisie to save her. I think maybe she saved me." A pause passed between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "I used to play piano," Ella said. Surprising herself, Cal looked up. "There's an old upright in the back room." He said, "My mother's. I haven't touched it since, well, a long time." Ella's fingers twitched. "Mind if I?" He nodded. "Be my guest." The piano sat near a bay window. Its wood faded, some keys chipped at the edges. Ella ran her hand along the lid before lifting it. She sat down and breathed in the scent, dust and varnish, memory and music. Her fingers hovered above the keys, uncertain. Then she began. Soft. Hesitant at first. A lullaby. Familiar, broken by silence, but whole in its tenderness. From the hallway, Cal froze. It was the melody his mother used to play when he couldn't sleep. He didn't move, just stood there, letting the notes fill him, echo inside the parts of him that had been dry and cold for too long. In the corner, Maisie stopped coloring. Sophie turned to look at her mother, eyes wide with awe. Ella finished the final note, then sat very still. Behind her, Cal said, "I haven't heard that in over 30 years." Ella turned, eyes shining. "I didn't know it was hers," she said. Cal shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It's yours now, too." And in that moment, the old house, quiet for so many years, felt alive again. Ella sat on the front steps of the Bennett farmhouse, the evening air cool against her skin. The sky had darkened into shades of blue and lavender stars, beginning to blink awake in the open Kansas sky. She hugged the borrowed sweater around her shoulders and listened to the quiet, a kind of quiet she hadn't known in years. Inside, Sophie was asleep again, warm and full from dinner, curled next to Maisie on a makeshift bed in the living room. The two girls hadn't said much, but there was a gentleness to the way they existed beside each other. It reminded Ella of the kind of peace that couldn't be taught, only felt. She took a sip of tea, fingers wrapped tightly around the chipped ceramic mug. The stillness outside was broken only by the occasional rustle of wind across the dry grass and the distant creak of the barn settling into the night. Then the screen door behind her creaked open. Cal stepped out, holding a lantern in one hand, a second mug in the other. "Thought you might want a refill," he said. His voice quiet and familiar. "Now." "Thanks," she said, reaching for it. He sat beside her, setting the lantern on the step between them. Its golden glow cast soft shadows across his worn flannel shirt, catching the lines in his face. He looked tired, but solid, like a man carved from something permanent. "Girls asleep?" he asked. She nodded. Sophie didn't even fight it tonight. First time in weeks. "That's a good sign," Ella exhaled. "It is." They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, watching the stars. Ella tried to remember the last time she'd sat like this with anyone, not worrying about the next motel, checkout, the next gas tank, the next emergency room bill. One night only, she murmured to herself, barely audible. "What was that?" Cal asked. She shook her head. "It's what I always tell myself. Every time someone helps, every time someone offers a bed or a sandwich. One night only. Then we move on." Cal didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "That's a hard way to live." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It's the only way we've had." "Doesn't have to be," he said. Ella turned to look at him. "You don't even know me." "No," he said evenly. "But I know what it's like to lose your footing, to think you'll never get it back. And I know what it looks like when someone's trying to keep their kid afloat with nothing but willpower and stubbornness." His words hit harder than she expected. "I've made mistakes," she said. "Some big ones. I stayed too long in a bad marriage. I trusted the wrong people. I didn't plan ahead." He nodded. "We all make mistakes, but not everyone keeps going. That counts for something." Ella looked down at the mug in her hands. "I didn't mean for Sophie to live like this. I didn't think we'd end up in the back of a car lost in the middle of Kansas. She doesn't look lost," Cal said. "She looks like a kid who still believes her mom can fix everything." Ella swallowed hard. That was the part that scared her most. The belief Sophie still had in her. What would happen when that ran out? Cal's voice was softer now. "You know when I brought Maisie home. I didn't think I could do it. I was grieving angry. I didn't want to feel responsible for anything, let alone a child." "What changed?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. She did not with words. She didn't talk for the first 5 months, but just being there, needing me, it forced me to step back into the world. He looked at her, then eyes honest and without pity. "Maybe Sophie's doing the same for you." Ella blinked back, unexpected tears. "I think you might be right." Cal nodded once, then stood. "There's blankets in the closet, towels in the bathroom. If you need anything, just knock." She looked up at him. "Cal, thank you for not asking questions you didn't have to ask." He shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I figure life throws enough questions our way. Sometimes, the best thing you can give someone is a place where they don't have to answer any." He went back inside, leaving Ella on the porch, her heart heavier and lighter all at once. Inside, Maisie stirred in her sleep. Sophie mumbled something unintelligible and kicked her covers off. Cal watched them for a moment, then turned toward the hallway. He passed the piano room and paused. The air still held a faint echo of the song Ella had played. The melody from his mother reborn in the hands of a stranger. He stepped inside, turned on the lamp, and sat on the edge of the old upholstered chair by the window. From here, he could see the stars stretching endlessly across the night sky. For years, they'd looked cold to him, distant and unreachable. But tonight, they seemed a little warmer, a little closer. Back on the porch, Ella sat alone. "One night only," she whispered again. But even as she said it, something inside her knew it wouldn't be. The sun rose slow and golden over the Bennett farm, casting long shadows across the fields, as morning mist clung to the grass. Inside the farmhouse, the scent of bacon and toast drifted through the air, warm and welcoming. Cal stood at the stove in his usual flannel flipping pancakes with practiced ease. Maisie sat at the table still in her pajamas, a crayon gripped in one hand and a half-finished drawing in front of her. Her eyes flicked between the paper and the doorway. Ella hadn't come down yet. In the living room, Sophie was curled up on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the flames in the fireplace flicker and dance. She looked better this morning, color returning to her cheeks. The dark shadows beneath her eyes softened by rest. Cal poured batter into the skillet and turned to Maisie. "Think she'll like pancakes?" Maisie nodded. "She likes sweet things," she said quietly. Cal raised an eyebrow. "You asked her?" Maisie shrugged, but a faint smile crept onto her lips. He was about to reply when they heard it soft at first, then growing stronger. The gentle wandering notes of a piano drifting down the stairs. It wasn't a polished performance, more like someone rediscovering something they thought they'd lost. The notes didn't flow so much as feel their way forward, one by one. Halting, thoughtful, tender Cal froze. His hand still gripped the spatula, but he didn't flip the next pancake. Maisie turned her head toward the sound her crayon forgotten. Sophie sat up straighter on the couch, blinking. The melody was familiar painfully. So it was the same lullaby his mother used to play when storms kept him awake as a boy. He hadn't heard it since before she died. He hadn't even remembered it clearly until last night. Now it was back, breathing softly through the house, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath all these years. Upstairs, Ella sat at the old upright piano in the back room, her fingers trembling slightly above the keys. She hadn't intended to play. She'd only meant to touch the instrument to feel something real under her hands. But the moment her fingertips brushed the worn ivory, the music came unbidden, as though it had been waiting in the silence. She wasn't playing for anyone, not for applause, not for money, just for herself, for Sophie, for the part of her that still remembered how to feel something besides fear. The piano wasn't perfect. Some keys stuck, others were slightly out of tune, but there was beauty in its flaws, just like there was beauty in hers. Ella closed her eyes, letting the music carry her somewhere, softer, somewhere, before courts and custody battles, and sleeping in the back seat, somewhere safe. When the last note faded, she sat still for a moment, letting the quiet settle. Then a voice from behind startled her. "That was my mother's favorite," Cal said gently. Ella turned quickly, startled and a little embarrassed. "I didn't mean to. I thought everyone was downstairs." "You're fine," he said, stepping into the room. "Maisie and Sophie are listening like it's church." Ella looked away, self-conscious. "I haven't played in a long time. Could have fooled me," she smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "It's not the same without an audience." Not the way it used to be. Cal leaned against the doorway. Maybe that's a good thing. She looked at him puzzled. He continued. Back then. You played for strangers, right? For critics. Maybe now. You just play for you. Or for someone you love. Ella's throat tightened. I used to think music was my only purpose, she said. But then Sophie came along and everything changed. I didn't stop playing, but it stopped being enough. Cal nodded understanding in his quiet way. Funny thing, he said. I stopped listening to music altogether after my wife died. Couldn't stand it. Too many memories. Too many things I didn't want to feel. She tilted her head. And now, I don't know. Hearing you play, it felt like something cracked open. Something I didn't even know was still shut. There was a silence between them, not awkward, not forced, just the kind of silence that grows when two people realize they're not alone in their grief. Ella stood from the bench. Breakfast. Cal smiled. Yeah, and you better come down before Maisie finishes all the pancakes. At the table, the girls were already mid-conversation, or at least their version of it. Sophie was showing Maisie her rabbit, and Maisie was carefully holding out a pencil sketch of the bunny she'd just drawn. Ella smiled as she poured herself some coffee. She didn't remember the last time she'd seen Sophie so still. So present, Cal handed her a plate. Maisie says you like sweet things. She's not wrong, Ella said, taking a seat. Though I'm usually more of a pastry girl, you'll have to settle for pancakes today, he teased. She took a bite and let her eyes close for just a second. It wasn't a croissant from a French cafe, but it was warm and good, and made with care, and that mattered more than she expected. After breakfast, the girls went out to play in the front yard, Sophie still in her borrowed boots and oversized coat. Cal and Ella stood by the window watching them. They're good together, she said. They are, Cal replied. Maisie doesn't open up easily, but she's smiling more. Now, Ella's voice was quieter. Sophie never had many friends. We moved around too much. She always asked, "How long will we stay this time?" And I never had an answer. Cal looked at her. Maybe now she does. Ella turned toward him. Don't say that unless you mean it. I don't say much. I don't mean. And in that moment, neither of them smiled. Neither of them joked. They just stood in the stillness, watching the children laugh under the big sky. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt like maybe the worst had already passed. The afternoon sun poured through the kitchen window in wide, gentle streams, catching motes of dust in its golden light. Cal stood at the counter, drying dishes with a towel that had seen better days. The smell of apples and cinnamon lingered from the small pie Ella had insisted on baking after lunch. Through the open front door, the soft laughter of two little girls floated in on the breeze. Maisie and Sophie were in the yard again, barefoot, breathless, and for once without a care in the world, Cal glanced outside and smiled. Maisie was twirling her arms, stretched wide, as Sophie mimicked her every move. They looked like two wildflowers spinning in the wind. It was a sound Cal hadn't heard in years, not since Maisie had come to him, silent, hollow-eyed, unsure of everything. For the first few months, she'd refused to speak at all. It was as if her voice had been buried with whatever life she'd left behind. But now, standing barefoot in the grass, she was laughing. It hit him harder than he expected. Is it always this quiet here? Ella asked, stepping into the kitchen, a folded dish towel in her hands. Cal nodded. Most days, unless the rooster gets in a fight with the cat. She smiled. It's strange, isn't it? How loud peace can be when you're not used to it. He looked at her, admiring the way sunlight softened the worry lines in her face. She looked less like someone surviving and more like someone arriving. Like the road behind her was finally still. You're good with her, he said. Maisie, he nodded. She's got a quiet kind of strength, Ella said. Like she's watching everything, storing it away. She's been through more than she lets on. I can tell, Ella said softly. Sophie's the same. She acts like she's fearless, but it's just armor. Underneath, she still wakes up crying for me in the middle of the night. Cal nodded, setting down the towel. Maisie hasn't cried in almost 2 years, he said. Not once I used to worry something in her had broken for good. Ella leaned against the counter. And now, I think Cal said she's starting to come back. Outside, Sophie picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt. Maisie crouched beside her, helping shape a crooked heart. Their voices carried in through the window, soft, girlish, full of joy. Suddenly, the front door opened with a creak. Maisie entered, her cheeks, pink from play, hair tangled and shirt streaked with dirt. Sophie followed behind her, carrying the rabbit by one ear. Maisie held something behind her back. What have you got there? Cal asked. Maisie stepped forward and handed him a folded piece of notebook paper. He opened it carefully. A drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands under a big sun, a small house behind them, and 2 children standing between the adults. One of the kids held a bunny at the bottom, written in careful, wobbly letters, us. Cal stared at it. Something thick rose in his throat. Maisie looked up at him. Is it okay? She asked. He crouched down, his voice a whisper. Maisie, it's perfect. Her eyes flicked to Ella, then back to him, and then for the first time in her life, Maisie reached out and hugged him. Cal froze. She pressed her face against his chest and whispered, Dad. He couldn't move, could barely breathe. All the months of silence, of unanswered questions, of quiet aching, undone by a single word. He wrapped his arms around her gently but firmly, anchoring both of them in a moment that felt like grace. Ella watched from the counter, one hand covering her mouth, tears springing to her eyes without warning. Sophie ran to her mother, clutching her leg. Maisie has a dad, she whispered. Ella knelt down and hugged her as she does. Sophie looked up curious. Can I have one too? Ella blinked. Her heart skipped. Before she could answer, Sophie added quickly, Not right now. Just maybe later. Ella laughed through her tears. We'll see, baby. That night, Cal found Maisie fast asleep with the drawing still clutched in her hand. He took it gently, smoothed the wrinkles, and pinned it to the fridge with a magnet. The word, us, stared back at him like a promise he hadn't known he'd been waiting for. Later in the quiet of the front porch, Ella joined him with 2 mugs of cocoa. No words were needed at first. The stars were out, glittering like scattered stories in the sky. She called you Dad, Ella said eventually. He nodded, still overwhelmed. I've never seen anything so sacred, she said. Cal turned to her. I thought it would never happen. I thought maybe I didn't deserve it. You do, she said firmly. They sat together in the silence of belonging, 2 tired hearts slowly beginning to trust the shape of something new. Ella stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom, watching Sophie sleep beneath the patchwork quilt. Her daughter's cheeks were flushed from play. One arm wrapped tightly around her stuffed rabbit. The other sprawled across the empty space beside her. The room was dark, quiet, but for the crickets, humming softly outside the window. The wind rattled the trees gently, the same way it had every night since they arrived. 6 days, that was how long they'd been at the Bennett farm. 6 days longer than she had planned. She stepped quietly into the room and began folding their clothes into the duffel bag she kept tucked behind the door. There wasn't much, 2 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, a small makeup bag with barely used contents. Everything else had been sold, left behind, or discarded out of necessity. The longer you ran, the lighter you learned to travel. It was nearly midnight. Cal and Maisie had gone to bed hours ago. Ella moved like a ghost through the room, careful not to wake her daughter. She had done this before, in motels, in borrowed rooms, in shelters, with curfews and whispered prayers. She was good at leaving till this felt different. Heavier, she paused, looking at the small pink hoodie in her hands. Sophie's favorite threadbare at the cuffs, a jelly stain still clinging near the hem. It smelled faintly of the farmhouse soap Ella had used earlier that week. It smelled like safety, like stillness. Her throat tightened. She zipped the bag shut. Downstairs, the kitchen was dark, but moonlight poured in through the window above the sink, casting silver onto the countertops. Ella set the bag by the back door and leaned against the counter. Leaving was the right thing. It had to be. This house was too whole. These people were too kind. And she was a story half told, broken in places no one should have to see. She couldn't stay, not when it was clear that Cal and Maisie had carved out a life with hard-earned peace. Her presence felt like an interruption, even if no one said it aloud. And besides, there were papers she hadn't filed. A custody hearing still lingering in Denver. The past didn't go away just because you found a warm place to rest your head. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded note she had written earlier in the day. Cal, thank you for everything. You and Maisie gave us more than we deserved. But I can't stay. Not when there's so much I haven't fixed. Please don't worry about us. We'll be okay. Tell Maisie. Sophie will never forget her. Ella, she laid it gently on the table next to a coffee mug that still held the scent of this morning's breakfast. And then, just as she reached for the door handle, a sound froze her in place. Soft footsteps, then a voice, quiet, cracking like dry leaves. Are you leaving? Ella turned. Maisie stood at the base of the stairs barefoot, her small hand gripping the banister. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened in the pale light. Ella swallowed hard. Maisie, you should be in bed. The girl took a step closer. Are you taking the Sophie? Ella couldn't lie. Yes, does she know? No, Maisie looked at her for a long moment. You don't have to go. Ella crouched down. Maisie, sweet girl. I do. Not because I want to, but because I'm not like your dad. I haven't figured everything out. Yet, Maisie walked closer and stood right in front of her. Sophie doesn't care. Ella's breath hitched. She likes it here. Maisie continued. She sleeps better. She laughs. I know, Ella said softly. So do I. Maisie's lower lip trembled, and for a moment she looked every bit her age. You made her happy, she said. And you made my dad smile again. Ella's eyes filled. I messed things up, she whispered. Maisie shook her head. Not here. Behind them, another voice. Deeper, ragged, spoke from the hallway. She's right. Ella turned. Cal stood near the stairs, arms crossed, face unreadable. I wasn't going to wake anyone, she said quickly. I wrote a note, I saw it. Ella reached for words, but none came. I get it, Cal said. The urge to leave before something breaks, before they ask you to. I've done it, more than once. He walked into the kitchen, picked up the note, folded it, and set it in his pocket. But this, he said. This isn't that kind of place. No one's asking you to leave. I'm not your responsibility. Ella said. No, you're not. But not everything has to be earned to be offered. She looked down, tears falling freely now. I don't know how to stay. I don't know how to trust something. This... Good. Cal stepped closer. Then stay anyway. Learn with us. Maisie reached for Ella's hand and placed it against her own cheek. And in that moment, something in Ella cracked. Not in a way that hurt, but like an old door finally giving way to the light. Later, when Sophie woke and saw the duffel bag still by the door, She blinked sleepily and asked, "Are we going, Nami?" Ella knelt beside her and hugged her tight. "Baby," she whispered. "We're staying." The day after Ella stayed, the weather shifted. Kansas skies turned brooding, thick clouds gathered across the horizon, and the wind carried with it the scent of rain and something older, something like change. Inside the Bennett farmhouse, the light seemed dimmer, but the air warmer. Somehow, there was no longer a sense of waiting for someone to leave. Instead, it felt like everyone had quietly decided to stay to begin again. In the kitchen, Cal stood by the window, watching Maisie and Sophie play with a battered red wagon in the yard. Their laughter rose in uneven bursts as they took turns pulling each other through the grass. Ella leaned on the opposite counter, a cup of tea in her hand. Her eyes focused not on the girls, but on Cal. "You're quiet today," she said. He nodded. "I get that way when storms roll in. Something about them makes everything feel closer." Ella took a sip, closer to what he glanced at her, then turned back to the window. To whatever's unfinished, she didn't press him. She knew that feeling well. There was a long moment of silence before Cal finally spoke again. "I used to think I had it figured out," he said. "This life, the land, the house, the routine. I thought if I kept everything predictable, maybe the pain wouldn't sneak in." He paused, then looked at her directly. But it did. It always finds a way. Ella set her cup down gently. "Cal," he held up a hand, "I want to tell you something. Not because I need to, but because I think you deserve to know." She nodded quietly, bracing herself. "My wife, Hannah, she died 3 years ago. Car crash on an icy road. They said it was no one's fault, but that doesn't change the fact that I told her to go into town that day. I wanted coffee. We were out. She didn't want to go, but I insisted. Said I'd fix the fence while she was gone." His voice was steady, but his jaw was clenched. "I spent 3 hours patching a fence that didn't matter. By the time I got the call, they'd already moved her body to the morgue." Ella said nothing, her eyes stinging. "I didn't go to the funeral," he added. "I sat on the porch for 2 days and drank a bottle of whiskey I didn't even like. When I finally went to the hospital to sign the papers, that's when I met Maisie." He smiled faintly. He was just sitting there, small, quiet. "They told me she'd been left at the emergency entrance. No ID, no story. She didn't speak, wouldn't even look anyone in the eye." Ella's voice was gentle. "And you took her home. I didn't plan to, but I couldn't leave her either. Something in her eyes. It looked like the way I felt. Like a ship with the sails torn off." Ella's throat caught. She didn't speak for months. Cal continued, just sat near the window, but she watched everything, like she was studying the world to see if it was worth rejoining. "And what did she decide?" Ella asked Cal, finally smiled. "She called me Dad." Ella looked down at her hands, then back up. "You know, I used to think I had the whole world in my hands too. Sold-out concert halls, write-ups in magazines. My ex-husband liked that part, the spotlight, but he didn't like the rest of me. He liked my success, not my strength." Cal didn't interrupt. "The day I walked out," she said, "I didn't even pack a suitcase. I just took Sophie and drove. I thought I'd figure it out, but every town was harder than the last. Every night in the car felt a little colder." She turned to face him fully. "I don't know how to stop running," she said. "Even when I want to. Even now, when it's good. My first instinct is still to leave before someone tells me to go." Cal's voice was quiet but firm. "Then don't leave. Not until someone tells you to. And I promise you, it won't be me." A tear slipped down Ella's cheek, and she didn't bother to hide it. "I'm tired, Cal," she whispered. Not just in my body, in my soul. He stepped toward her, hesitated, then placed his hand gently over hers on the counter. Then rest, he said. This place is made for people like us, not perfect. Just trying. Outside, the girls had moved to the porch, sitting cross-legged with a coloring book between them. Sophie was humming softly. Maisie was focused, her tongue poking out slightly as she shaded in a butterfly. Do they know how lucky they are? Ella asked softly. They will, Cal replied. If we do it right. She looked at him. Can we? I think we already are. That night, as thunder rolled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to tap against the roof, Ella sat in the piano room with Sophie, asleep in her lap. Maisie curled on the rug nearby, reading a book by lantern light. Cal came in and leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching them. Ella didn't speak. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, the silence between them wasn't heavy or uncertain. It was peace. The wind changed that afternoon. It wasn't the kind of shift you could see right away, but Cal felt it, how the breeze lost its softness, how the sky began to turn the color of old bruise. The cattle in the far pasture moved uneasily restless. The barn doors rattled without reason. A storm was coming. A real one. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon. His gut, which had grown more reliable than the weather radio over the years, tightened with that familiar unease. The prairie had a way of warning those who listened. Inside, the girls were playing dress-up with an old box of Hannah's scarves and hats. Ella sat on the floor, with them laughing as Sophie tried to drape 3 scarves on Maisie at once. The house felt full of life, the kind that had been missing for years. And that made Cal nervous, because storms didn't just test the roof, they tested everything. He stepped back inside and quietly began closing windows. Wind's picking up, he said. Ella looked up, sensing the change in his tone. Bad could be. Kansas doesn't play fair. They worked in tandem almost instinctively, pulling in laundry from the line, gathering flashlights, checking batteries. Ella moved with a focused urgency. Cal admired. She didn't panic. She prepared by dusk. The sky had turned a dusky green, and the air was thick electric. Cal lit the oil lanterns and placed one in each room. He found the girls in the living room cuddled under a quilt, their play forgotten. Outside, thunder grumbled low and steady like a giant clearing its throat. You girls okay? Cal asked Maisie. Nodded. Sophie looked uneasy but held on to her bunny tighter. Ella sat beside them and said cheerfully, It's just noise, like a big drum in the sky. Nothing to worry about. But even as she spoke, the house groaned against a sudden gust, and the lights flickered. Cal moved to the window. The trees were thrashing now, wild in the wind, branches bent like they were praying. And then came the sound no one ever wanted to hear on the prairie. Sharp hollow, rising in pitch, a siren tornado, warning Cal turned to Ella basement. Now, they moved quickly, Cal leading the way, as Ella scooped up Sophie and Maisie followed close behind. The storm door, out back, banged open and shut in the wind, and Cal had to fight it with both hands to secure the latch once everyone was inside. The basement was cool and dry, lit by a single hanging bulb. There were canned goods on old shelves, a thick quilt in the corner, and a small wooden bench that Hannah had once insisted they put there just in case. They settled in Ella, sitting on the floor with both girls pressed against her. Cal stood near the stairs, listening to the storm claw at the roof above them. Thunder cracked closer now. The wind howled with a pitch that made the hair on his arms rise. Maisie huddled closer to Sophie, and for the first time in over a year, she reached out to hold someone's hand. Sophie squeezed back immediately. fearless for her friend. Ella looked up at Cal. Her face was calm, but her eyes told the truth. This was testing her strength, too. He walked over and knelt beside them. "Won't be long," he said. "These old walls have seen worse." Maisie looked up at him and whispered, "Will it break the house?" Cal shook his head. "No, sweetheart. It might shake it a little, but this place was built to stand." Maisie nodded, then leaned into his side. Outside, the storm raged. Branches cracked. Something heavy slammed against the barn. Cal said a quiet prayer for the animals. The minutes passed, slow and heavy. Ella rested her chin on Sophie's head and closed her eyes. Her whole body trembled, not just from fear, but from holding everything in for too long. "Cal," she said quietly, "if something happens." He looked at her. She swallowed. "Just make sure Sophie knows she was the best part of me." He reached over and took her hand. "Nothing's going to happen," he said. "Not tonight. You're both staying. That's not how this ends." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks without sound. He didn't let go of her hand. When the storm finally passed, it didn't announce its departure. It simply withdrew, like a breath, held too long, released slowly. The wind died. The thunder rolled into the distance, and the silence that followed was almost louder than the storm itself. Cal climbed the stairs and opened the cellar door carefully. The yard was a mess. Branches scattered one shutter, ripped clean off the side of the house. The barn had lost part of its roof, but the house stood under the fences. The trees bent, but did not break. He came back down. "We're okay," he said. Maisie hugged Sophie. Sophie yawned into her shoulder. Ella exhaled, her shoulders relaxed. Later that night, after the cleanup began and the girls were asleep in their beds, Cal stood on the porch, with Ella looking at the star-lit remains of the storm. "I meant what I said." She told him about Sophie. He looked at her. "I know, but I don't ever want you to have to say it again." She turned to him. "I've spent so long thinking everything good would leave, or I'd have to leave it." "You don't," he said. She stepped closer. "Then tell me this is real." He hesitated only a moment, then brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "It is." And as the first crickets began to sing in the wet grass, and the stars blinked brighter above the recovering land, Ella believed him. For the first time in years, she truly believed. A week after the storm, the Bennett farm settled into a new kind of quiet. It was the kind of quiet that didn't come from emptiness, but from comfort, a steady rhythm of days filled with soft routines and slow rebuilding. The barn roof had been patched, the fences mended. Cal's hands were raw from work, but his spirit felt less heavy. Inside the house, things shifted gently, almost imperceptibly. Sophie had claimed the far corner of the living room with her books and Rabbit. Maisie moved more freely, her bare feet padding down the hallway without hesitation. And Ella, she had begun to leave the piano room door open when she played. The music had become part of the house. It drifted in with the morning light filling the kitchen while Cal made coffee. It floated up the stairs at night, tucking the girls in as surely as any blanket. There was no performance in it anymore, just presence. One afternoon, Cal stood in the doorway of the old hay loft, watching the two girls dance in circles. Ella was with them, twirling slowly, her laughter light and unguarded. He hadn't heard her laugh like that before, and in that moment, something in him softened so deeply, so permanently. It was as if the land itself breathed easier. That Saturday, the town held its annual harvest festival. Cal hadn't gone since Hannah passed. The idea of walking through crowds smiling politely, pretending to enjoy hayrides and pie contests. It had felt hollow for too long, But this year was different. Maisie had asked, and Sophie had never been. So Cal dusted off his old boots, loaded the truck, and drove them all into town. Main Street was lined with booths, selling everything from cinnamon cider to hand-knitted scarves. Music played from a wooden stage, where teenagers in denim strummed guitars and sang about old loves and small towns. Ella walked beside him, wearing a soft blue sweater and jeans, her hair loose in the wind. Cal noticed how people looked at her. Curious, some cautious, but no one unkind. This town had a memory, but it also had room for grace. They wandered together, the girls tugging them from booth to booth. At one stand, Sophie picked up a tiny wooden heart on a string and held it out to Maisie. "For you?" she said. Maisie blushed, then slipped it over her head. Cal watched the exchange, heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. "Daddy," Maisie said, suddenly turning to him. He blinked, still getting used to the sound of that word on her lips. "Can we show them?" she asked. "Show who what?" he asked. Maisie turned to Sophie, who was already nodding. "Come on," they shouted in unison, grabbing Cal and Ella by the hands and dragging them toward the stage. Ella hesitated at the edge of the crowd. "What are they doing?" Cal squinted. The girls had walked straight up to the announcer and said something, pointing excitedly back at Ella. The woman with the mic smiled and leaned down. After a brief conversation, she stepped onto the stage. "Folks," she said, "looks like we've got a surprise. These two young ladies have requested a very special performance, so if you'll give a warm welcome to Miss Ella Monroe, we'd be honored to hear her play." The crowd clapped politely. Ella turned to Cal, panicked. "I didn't agree to this," she whispered. He smiled. "Maybe they did it for you. I haven't played in public since I know," he said gently. "But maybe it's time." She hesitated only a moment more, then stepped forward. The piano on stage was old, but well-tuned. Ella sat slowly, hands trembling slightly as they hovered above the keys. Then she began. The melody was simple at first, like an opening line in a long-lost letter. Then it grew rich and steady, filled with hope and something else joy. Not loud, not grand, but sure, like a woman finally standing tall in her own skin. Cal stood in the crowd, Maisie clinging to his arm, Sophie humming beside them. He didn't realize he was crying until Maisie squeezed his hand. "She's really good," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "She is." When Ella finished, the crowd clapped politely, at first, then louder, as they stood surprised by how much they'd felt. From just a few quiet minutes of music, Ella stood flushed and looked out into the crowd. Her eyes found Cal's. He nodded once. She smiled. That evening back at the farm, they sat around the table eating leftover festival food and telling stories. Sophie announced that she wanted to start piano lessons. Maisie said she'd only agree if Ella taught them both. Ella laughed and promised to think about it. Cal poured cider into 4 mismatched mugs. "To new beginnings," he said. Maisie raised hers solemnly, and staying, everyone clinked. After the girls went to bed, Ella and Cal sat on the porch. The sky was velvet black, scattered with stars. "I wasn't ready for," that she said. "But you did it," Cal replied. She looked over at him. "Thank you for not pushing me. For just being steady. I wasn't always," he said. "But I want to be now." She reached for his hand. "You already are." They sat in silence, hand in hand, while the night settled gently around them. Winter came slowly to the Kansas prairie. It didn't rush in with icy storms or howling blizzards. It crept in on chilled winds and early sunsets. In breath that lingered in the morning air and the scent of firewood stacked neatly by the porch. At the Bennett farmhouse, the season brought a stillness that felt more like reverence than rest. Inside life unfolded in steady rhythms. Cal spent his mornings repairing the chicken coop and checking the livestock. Ella taught the girls piano lessons twice a week in the parlor. Sophie was precise and eager. Maisie cautious but steady. Their giggles echoed down the hallway like soft bells. The old house, once filled only with memory and silence, now pulsed with a quiet joy. Some nights, Cal would walk into the living room to find Ella asleep on the couch. Sophie curled up on her lap, a blanket draped over both of them. Maisie would be on the rug nearby, drawing in her notebook, eyes heavy but unwilling to miss a moment. He never moved them. He just stood and watched, memorizing every detail. One late afternoon just before Christmas, snow began to fall, not the kind that buried roads or demanded shovels, just a gentle flurry, the kind that made everything feel softer. Ella and Cal stood at the window, mugs in hand, watching the flakes settle on the fields. "Feels like the world's holding its breath," she said. He nodded. "Sometimes I think that's what this place is best at, reminding you to be still." She looked up at him. "You ever think about how all of this started?" That night, that phone call. He smiled every day. She laughed gently. "Still don't know how Sophie managed to call you. She doesn't even remember dialing the number." "Maybe it wasn't her," he said. Half teasing, Ella raised an eyebrow. "I'm serious," he said. "Maybe it was something else, something bigger." She didn't laugh this time. Instead, she reached for his hand. "I think you might be right." Later that evening, the four of them decorated the tree together. It was a crooked pine they'd cut down behind the barn, imperfect and uneven, but beautiful in its own way. Sophie insisted on putting the angel at the top. Cal lifted her up, steadying her with one hand as she reached Maisie, placed a paper heart ornament on one of the lower branches. Ella had helped her cut it out earlier that day. It read, "Family isn't who you're born to. It's who holds your hand when the storm comes." Cal's chest tightened. He turned to Maisie, who stood there with her small hands folded, watching him. "Did you write that?" he asked. She nodded. "Do you like it?" He knelt down. "I love it." Maisie leaned in and whispered, "I have something else." She pulled a small envelope from behind the tree and handed it to him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple drawing, 4 stick figures just like before, but this time each one had a name written underneath in Maisie's careful print. Sophie, me, Mommy, Ella, Daddy, Cal. And below that, a new word, written in big letters. Us. Cal swallowed hard. "Maisie, I wanted you to have it," she said, "because that's what I call us now." Sophie came over and leaned against Cal's side. "Can I call you Daddy too?" Cal looked at Ella. Her eyes were already glistening. He turned to Sophie and nodded, his voice thick. "You can call me anything you want, sweetheart." She smiled wide and certain. Then I picked Daddy. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Ella and Cal stood by the fire. The room glowed in amber light, soft shadows dancing along the walls. "I didn't know I could feel this way again," she said. He reached for her hand. Neither did I. They stood in silence, the warmth of the fire mirroring the warmth between them. "I've been thinking," Cal said softly. "About what? About how sometimes the things we're running from are the very things we need to run toward." She looked at him, her eyes tender. "Like what?" "Like second chances. Like a family that finds you even when you didn't ask for one." She stepped into his arms, her voice barely a whisper, and love. He smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. Especially love. The wind outside hushed. The snow fell steady. And in that old farmhouse, something new had taken root. Not just survival, not just kindness, but the kind of love that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but builds slowly, steadily, until one day it simply is. A home. A family. A forever, that came not by blood, but by choice. We'd love to know where in the world are you watching from today. Whether you're in a small town with wide skies or sipping coffee in the heart of a busy city, your presence here means the world to us. If this story touches your heart, feel free to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. We share stories of hope, healing, and unexpected grace, because the world always needs more of that. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. Your time is precious, and we're honored to be a small part of your day.